The following video was recorded privately with the Head-On community. The Head-On community is a group of individuals that meet almost daily to have good faith discussions about a whole array of contentious issues. If this is the kind of community you'd like to join, check out that link in the description. We'd love to have you join us, and I hope you enjoy the video.
Awesome. Welcome, Elijah and Jadd from Atidna organization.
Thank
We,
you.
yeah, we connected for the first time a few months ago. We had you on for a live stream. You both explained that you're building this awesome university on college campuses with a very simple goal, one that I think will resonate with their community here, bringing Israelis and Palestinians together for conversations. In that time, from what I've understood, you all have expanded quite significantly, so I'm very excited to have you back and hear about the progress you've made. So welcome.
Thank you so much, man.
Thank
It's
you.
a pleasure to be back. Yeah.
Yeah, so let's just start. Let me know what's been going on the past 6 or so months since we've last spoken, the growth you've achieved, maybe some challenges you faced. What's going on in your world?
You know, it's crazy. I think when we spoke, it was early April of 2024, if I'm not mistaken. And immediately after that, that's when the whole college protest wave broke out, starting at Columbia, and then it spread to UCLA, UT, all these other campuses across the country. And that's when the media really started taking a true vested interest in college campuses. And they said, oh, on one hand, there's protests. Is there any outlet for dialogue? And of course, there's only Atidna. So when all these organizations were trying to figure out someone to interview, they came straight to Atidna. And so we got insane media coverage shortly after the protest broke out. We actually did our first huge gig with ABC News' Nightline. So to be on ABC News was absolutely crazy. They came and filmed an actual in-person Atidna dialogue. The topic was the situation in Gaza and also college campuses, the protest movement. And so that was a huge experience. And then shortly after that, I was actually a protester on the ground at UT Austin. Every school had different protests to a degree. Some were for divestment, some were for a ceasefire, but I was active on my campus's protest. And Al Jazeera actually came to our university to interview some students, and they said, "Oh, there's this student who was a protester. He got pushed by a policeman on a horse. You should probably interview him. He runs this peace group, Atidna." And from there, Atidna's story also got put on Al Jazeera, and that got like 2 million views. Absolutely insane. So that just sparked a world of growth. And from there, we've expanded to 10 campuses. People have heard about us. Both Jewish students and Arab students have said, I want to bring Atidna to my campus to facilitate conversations. And it's been a wild ride, man. It's been absolutely insane.
Amazing.
Yeah, I don't have
Congrats.
much to add, honestly, on that. Like, we've expanded probably, I mean, based off of the number of members, like fivefold from where we were. I mean, the ABC News Nightline episode was probably it's the biggest thing that we've done, for sure. And it got great reviews, great ratings, and people really took it to heart. And we've expanded now. I think we're at 10 campuses total in the US, with many more hopefully on the way and across the nation. And yeah, as Elijah said, we've been continuing the sort of things that we've been doing at Atidna since the beginning. We've been continuing dialogue. We've been doing our peace events like we usually do. And, you know, just under a year ago was, as Elijah mentioned, was when college protests really were happening. And so it's kind of interesting to see now, 10 months later, really how things have changed. But we're very happy with everything that's been going on in terms of the organization. Obviously, now we hope for a better future for Israelis and Palestinians with the ceasefire that's been in place for a few weeks. And, hopefully we can kind of focus now, when the bloodshed is finally over, to move on to reconciliation, which is the ultimate goal.
100%.
Beautiful. Congratulations to you both on the much deserved success. It's really awesome to see. So
Thank you.
what does the programming look like? How often do you meet? What's the format of these discussions?
So we have per semester around 5 discussions. And it just depends what the members want to talk about. So it could be a historical discussion about 1948. It could be a current events discussion about what's happening in the West Bank or Gaza. It could really be whatever people want to talk about. But it's typically 5 dialogues per semester, so 5 over 15 weeks. There we typically have around 50 active in each dialogue. So 5 Jewish students, some of whom are Israeli, 5 Arab students, some of whom are Palestinian, and then 5 quote unquote others, people from neither background but are interested in the conversation and want to contribute. And we also hold one peace event every semester. So for example, this past semester at UC Austin, me and Jadd led a memorial to honor all innocents, Israelis and Palestinians who have been killed or lost their lives in the past year. We actually brought 2 relatively well-known activists, Maoz Zinon and Aziz Abu Sara, an Israeli and Palestinian who both lost loved ones over the course of the conflict, to talk about their loss and how they're transforming their loss into something productive and hopeful for reconciliation and mutual understanding. And so we're trying to hit a broad audience, both in terms of dialogue and peace work, but most of the time it's very productive. We find that we are more similar than different through these events, and that's where growth happens, and we're happy to facilitate it.
Elijah's right on that. This past semester we hosted 5 dialogue sessions, so pretty much every 3 weeks or so. We actually just had our first dialogue of this semester, and we have another one coming up in just about 10 days. And the topic varies, of course. Last semester we did one about the ceasefire, in terms of who's more to blame for a ceasefire. We did one about your identity, what's important to you as a Jew or Arab, Palestinian, Israeli, etc. We did topics about our historical connections to the land. And so we do all sorts of different topics. And as Elijah mentioned, we did a peace event in October of this past year, right after the 1 year mark of October the 7th, where we paid tribute to all innocent people killed, Palestinians, Israelis, and also people in other Arab countries nearby who had been involved. And it was a really beautiful event that we did. It was an event simply to mourn, to commemorate lives lost. We wanted to avoid politics, so no flags, no signs. And we both gave speeches. Oh yeah, we
has a wristbands. Yes, so it says brothers, not others. That's our trademark, and that's really our sentiment at Atidna, to solidify we're one family and not inherent enemies.
Yeah, and so the event was a huge success, and we're going to do another peace event this semester. We're still going to figure out what that is exactly, but really happy about it so far.
That's beautiful. You all need a female version of the bracelet, like sisters, not grifters, or something like that. You know?
Yeah,
so we have an elderly Palestinian professor here at UT Austin, and right before the event started, he pulled me aside and says, "Elijah, you're being misogynistic. Where are the women?" Right? And I said, "I'm sorry. I could have included sisters and brothers, not others, but that would have costed us an extra $50. So I took the cheaper route."
That's right.
Fair. Yeah. I mean, university students at the end of the day, and in the United States, where they're charging you probably a good 1,000% more than what they should be. So all good. So, you know, as I mentioned to you both briefly, you know, we're building the head-on community here, and, you know, currently the community exists in Discord, but one day it will be on the head-on platform, a platform designed for just these types of conversations. And we're training an AI facilitator, right? The idea is with an AI facilitator, we could scale civil discourse to millions of people around the world. But what we're really trying to master now in order to train the AI is the art of facilitation. So I'm wondering, your experience facilitating these conversations, right? You've hosted these 5 conversations. Who's facilitating them? What methods do you use, and what challenges have arose?
Yeah, that's a great question. So at every Atidna chapter, including ours at UT, there are at least 2 moderators, one who's of a Jewish background and one who's of an Arab background, and they're students. So for example, at UT Austin, Jadd and I are the moderators up until this past semester, actually, where I retired and I put another Jewish student who's taking over for my position. But at every chapter, at least one Jewish student, one Arab student, and that way we have a very even-keeled approach to making sure we don't have a bias in the moderation. In terms of how we go about actually moderating, it's Atidna's stance to actually take a more hands-off approach. We find that if we're entering into a dialogue with more rules, students typically feel constricted, that they don't want to share something. If you say, "Oh, don't make I statements, don't make generalizations," we want you to make generalizations, because that's when growth can happen. That's when another student can enter into the conversation and say, "Hey, that might be problematic, but here's my perspective." And that's how growth can really be facilitated. So me and Jadd are truly of the mindset that less overreach is always better. Let students feel as comfortable coming in here to share their thoughts and perspectives, and that's where growth can happen, when someone wants to also feel open to share their perspective. And that's how we've done it. The only time we personally try to take a more hands-on approach is when there's like a risk of actual animosity breakdown in the conversation, maybe physical violence, and that's when me and Jadd will have to come in and settle things down. But other than that, we're just there to really ensure that one group is not dominating over the other, everyone's called on evenly, and there's no inherent tension in the room after to a degree, of course.
Yeah, we try to host a variety of opinions. We don't want, monolithic groups for sure. I mean, we have Palestinians with different views. We have, of course, even Palestinian Christians and Palestinian Muslims. We have Israeli Jews. We have obviously just Jewish Americans. We have a variety of different people and a variety of different opinions, some Zionists, some anti-Zionists, some non-Zionists, all sorts of political ideologies that you can define. And the point there is to try to really give as representative of a conversation that you would find in the real world. I mean, we want to show off many different perspectives and not just kind of put people into little echo chambers. In my opinion, that's what is the most dangerous thing to do when we stick to our echo chambers and we don't expand. But as Elijah said, him and I personally have never had formal training in dialogue. We actually just did a Zoom call the other day where we kind of got some more advice about actually breaking down dialogue, which we're going to be using. But at every chapter, we have a president and vice president or co-presidents, one of whom is Jewish and one is Arab. And they are the moderators for the event, as Elijah mentioned. Now that I'm the president of the UT chapter, I'm sort of the head moderator with our Jewish vice president, who's also doing a phenomenal job moderating these events. And it's again, we have dialogues at about an hour and a half long each time, and we want people of all different perspectives. Obviously for people who have more radical views, it's a bit of a challenge, but as long as you are not going to dehumanize people or just give honestly grotesque language, then we want you to be involved in the conversation, because frankly, we think the more authentic the conversation, the better it is. There's no need to sugarcoat in a conversation like this, because where are we really going to get if we just do that?
Right. It seems like you both are having similar experience to us over here, and I think what we're understanding is that when you're either whether it's virtual or in person, as long as it's not text-based and you're using your voice and showing your face,
Yeah.
the conversation is already so much easier. It's really in these text-based conversations that dominate social media today where things get extremely toxic.
Yes. I mean, there's a level of personality allocated when you have your face and your voice in the conversation, right? If you're just behind a screen, there's a degree of anonymity, and people really can say whatever they want and face no repercussions. And that's where the toxic, polarizing language really hails from. When you're in person, when you're seeing a human being face to face and having conversations, it's really hard to devolve to that kind of speech. So by far, as long as you have a face and a voice allocated with the conversation, I think you're good to go.
Right.
I've seen that personally too with Israelis that I've spoken to who are fairly right wing. Many of them have told me, of course, they've never spoken to a Palestinian, and that when I spoke to them, they actually really began to start thinking differently, because they said, well, I thought about Palestinians in a certain light, but now that I've met you and I've gotten to know you, even just the personal interaction that we had one-on-one, I mean, it's even just that conversation versus a text message or just a blanket, social media direct message, it makes perhaps all the world's difference. It really is. It's interesting how small something like a one-on-one in-person conversation can actually change a lot of people.
And it doesn't even have to be in person. It can be virtual as well. I will say, in my own background and my own experience, as a Jewish individual growing up, I was never exposed to in-person or virtual Palestinian conversations, right? If I was hearing the Palestinian narrative, it was either in my own community, from people in my Hebrew school, from my professors and teachers who were very biased, even outright racist with regards to Palestinians, or it was from toxic discourse online that fed into my belief system that these people are radicals or extremists. But once I finally got to high school, was able to talk with Palestinians for the first time, to hear their stories, their aspirations, their culture, I learned, man, this is a human being. They're more similar to me than different. At the end of the day, as long as we can connect on a human-to-human level, then that's where growth can happen. And that really changed my world for sure.
The path to peace is paved through the humanization of the other. It's as simple as that.
That's beautiful.
It has to be.
Yeah, I mean, most Israelis, the Palestinians we know, I mean, we do have Palestinian citizens of Israel, but we conveniently in Israel, they're in a separate category. They're considered Arab Israelis. They don't have a Palestinian identity within Israeli society. At least that's not, internally they do, but it's not something that Israelis recognize. So for us, the Palestinians we meet are the ones we hear about doing terror attacks, or the ones we see on social media, cheering in the streets when there's attacks. And,
Yeah.
Palestinians, who do they meet? They meet settlers and soldiers, neither of whom really treat them with dignity and respect. So we like to, you know, we often say we need to change the education system, and that is true, but even if the education system was completely neutral, the experiences that we have would give us this impression of one another. So there's no better tool to break down these walls of fear and ignorance and separation than the humanization process. So that's beautiful.
Exactly.
I recall last time we spoke, you guys said that after October 7th, the conversations became easier, and to me this was so counterintuitive, but the reason you gave was that the most extreme participants just stopped showing up, and those still willing to engage were the moderates. So I thought that was fascinating. Are you still finding that to be true?
I will say the demographics have reverted to a degree to how they were pre-October 7th. You're finding people that have more polarized positions enter the conversation. But I will also qualify, after around a year and a half more of experience, I wouldn't say it's necessarily the moderates making it easier to have the conversations. It's simply those with more empathy to ingrain the story of the other. Sometimes that happens to be people in the more center or moderate camp, but anyone who has the empathy to understand the other, especially in a moment of trauma, is the one who's going to produce the most productive conversation. And I find after October 7th, people possibly still had strong views. I think it was more people in the peace group, in the olive branch camp, but there were still people that definitely had their strong views, but were willing to have mutual understanding of the quote unquote other. And I find that as people are coming back, the ones who are still in the more extreme camp but still productive are those who are least willing to ingrain the narrative of the other. And in Atidna circles, it really is very helpful to have people like that, right? To have a wide breadth of opinions. We don't want to eliminate anyone, but at the end of the day, as long as you can ingrain that story, that's not just your own, that's when growth happens, and we're happy to facilitate it.
Well, I will say that we had our first dialogue of this semester, like almost 2 weeks ago, I suppose, and it was the first one since the ceasefire. And I will say, for me, it felt we actually did this at our local Hillel at UT. So we had pretty much an all Jewish organization, or all Jews in the conversation, and we hope to also do a conversation at the local mosque at UT as well, to expand to the Muslim and Arab community there. And I will say, there were people at the event who were definitely more extreme than who would typically come to an Atidna event. But for them, they felt for the first time in 15 months that they were finally able to have conversation, because the emotions were starting to, it became to a point where they were able to separate the emotional feel now to actually be able to have these conversations, and it wasn't as raw. And for me, I think that's very valuable. It was a different dialogue than what I feel like we typically would have had during the Israel-Hamas war. It felt kind of like a pre-October 7th dialogue, if anything. And I think there's value to that. And I've had people in that conversation who are a bit more extreme who told me they want to go to Atidna events now, people who previously probably would have been very turned off because the emotions were very high. And because of that, I think that's very valuable. And we're looking forward to our next dialogue to get people of all backgrounds. We have people who want to observe the event, who just want to come and also kind of just have a kind of a spectator perspective. And we're really, really interested to see how the semester is going to unfold if the ceasefire continues, and hopefully it does. I hope at that point we start to see more people of all different perspectives. And God knows how people have changed over the last 15 months. My views have certainly changed in certain degrees. And I think everybody could say that they've become more or less flexible in certain areas.
I think Jadd's also hitting on another point that we're trying to exploit to a degree. It's always easier to have conversations in your own community. So if you're going into a Hillel and the group's majority Jewish, people are going to be willing to enter that conversation if they're Jews, more likely than not, compared to a conversation where there's Palestinians and Arabs involved from the beginning. And likewise with a mosque, right? If we're going and facilitating this conversation amongst a community at a mosque, people are going to feel more comfortable to enter that community first before talking with Jews and Israelis. And so we at Atidna, we're trying to prime people to get into the Israeli Palestinian conversation by first facilitating these conversations in their local communities. And from there, we say, hey, this is what dialogue's all about. And hopefully, look, you're sharing your story amongst your community. if you're getting comfortable, let's progress this to getting to a point where you can share this with the quote unquote other. And I think that's really the tactic we're trying to approach this semester.
Right.
Beautiful. So we're going to open it up to Q&A. To whoever's here, you could either ask it in the chat or raise your hand and we'll bring you on stage to ask it with your own voice. Meanwhile, so you're now in 10 campuses. Is the idea to really just continue to scale this and, get to a place where you're in hundreds of campuses one day?
Yeah, that would be the end goal, right? I think we said it in our one of our interviews. I can't remember exactly which one, but the goal would be to get to every campus that there's a Jewish and Arab population. At the end of the day, I think it was the minority of campuses that were not experiencing tensions this past year. So wherever we have a population that's ripe for tension, we think Atidna would be necessary to help attenuate that and to begin the process of conversation. So, inshallah, Bizlat Hashem, every campus across the nation for sure.
And beyond the nation, we would. I mean, the organization is Atidna International. We would love to go overseas or up north to Canada. We would love, obviously, in Israel Palestine to expand because there are already so many organizations in that land that are starting who have done dialogue for so long, and we would love to expand it to universities there if possible. I know it's obviously a challenge.
It is a challenge because of free speech issues, especially. So we were actually trying to work with some Jewish and Arab students at Reichman University, and they said this was an issue with the Palestinian students. They said we can't say the word Nakba without our security at the school being in jeopardy. And so that inherently is antithetical for a free and open conversation. And so I would say in the Holy Land, there's a lot more tensions to navigate through to get a conversation to happen. Grassroots, non-public forums are typically better to facilitate conversations. One group that I'm a part of, and Jadd's also a part of, is Roots. They're a group in the West Bank that brings together Jews, Arabs, Israelis, Palestinians. It's actually based out of a Palestinian farm, but it's co-led by an Israeli settler and a Palestinian nonviolent activist, Khalid Abu Awad. And they bring together everyone to have conversations and build coexistence work together. So yeah, that's definitely a forum that's more conducive for dialogue in the Holy Land.
Great. I see we have Shikana here. We're going to bring Shikana on the stage. Shikana, welcome.
Hello.
Hi. So I guess my question really is just what does it look like? Describe the form, how do the meetings start? How do you manage them? Are they different in different places? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in terms of every meeting, of course, there will be different topics. The way it typically begins is we give an overview of the topic. So I remember one conversation from around 2 years ago that was about Huwar, right? The settler violence in the West Bank. And I just gave a brief synopsis of what was happening in the West Bank. And then the topic was, what can we do about settler violence? How can we build a lasting solution where this doesn't happen in the future? And most of the time after the preface, we just open up the floor for whoever wants to begin. And then for me and Jadd, after that, our role is making sure Jewish students and Arab students are equally contributing. We don't want one group dominating the conversation and only sharing their perspective. If a Jewish student speaks, we're typically preferential to having a Palestinian or Arab student come after them. So just making sure everyone's equal, everyone's contributing and sharing their perspective in hopes of growth. So that it's very hands-off, but it's definitely prone to tension sometimes. That conversation was especially tense, but more often than not, we find we're more similar than different. We have more mutual understanding than divisions, and hopefully that can be the future that brings us together.
Hands off is a good way to describe it. We'll have an hour and a half for these dialogues, and we'll typically have just one topic, and we'll talk about it. Let's say it's historic related, and we'll bring up just kind of some details about history. And it's interesting always at the beginning, a lot of people are typically fairly nervous to kind of jump in the conversation, but really you'd be surprised by halfway through the conversation, more than half the room's hands are up. And we have to, kind of plan out who's going to talk when. But what we really like is that we don't want it to be, we try to avoid having, one group over here and one group over here sort of thing. And this 2-group dynamic, we want, 15 people, 15 perspectives, and we want it to just rat off one another, bang, 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 respond to one another. Because the amount of connections that people make and say, oh, I thought about that, now I'm going to hop on and give my own thoughts on this. It's very much free flowing. It's not a debate as much as it is a dialogue. It really is about expressing your mind and trying to basically have as authentic a way to do as possible. We don't want people to have any sort of prepared remarks or anything as if they're about to give a speech or a debate. But it just kind of goes off one another, and almost always we have to cut the conversation off at an hour and a half because people want to go longer. And we could go for 2.5 hours if we really wanted to, but it's we have to find a place to stop it. But it's very much free flowing and hands off, and it works really well. And we try to also, if people are talking a lot, we want to make sure that people have somewhat of an even time so that not anybody's just hogging the time. And so we'll pump the brakes on people who are wanting to speak all the time. But typically you raise your hand and we go through there. We try to not have people interrupt either. And it works pretty well. So
one of the most beautiful.
Come to Missouri. Do it.
We would love to come to Missouri. If you know any college students who are interested, please send them our way. But I want to add a quick comment to Jadd's point there. And Jadd's right. At the end of the hour and a half, people are not satisfied, right? They want to continue the conversation. They are like, oh my gosh, time got cut off. But a beautiful thing we see is what happens after the Atidna dialogue ends. Students are conglomerating the halls. They're still talking. They're meeting up, planning dinners to continue the conversation. And that's where the bridge building really happens. It's after the Atidna dialogue. People are meeting on a human-to-human level outside of the dialogue. And from there, that's how we build those grassroots relationships that are integral to coexistence and mutual understanding. And
that's 100% true. I mean, literally at Hillel, when we did the dialogue, we went from 5 to 6:30, and I can tell you for a fact, I didn't leave Hillel till 8 o'clock, and there were still people there talking to each other about everything related to Israel Palestine. I mean, literally, they were going on for an extra hour and a half and still talking to each other. And so, I mean, and these people had never met each other. Yeah.
I guess I have a follow-up question because, I went to Lebanon in 2017 as part of this Evangelizing Muslims conference. I'm a Christian. Actually, when I started speaking to Muslims online is when I started using more God language. In America, you don't use God language because it's not safe, right? And I was so surprised when I met Muslims, I could start talking about God. And when you go to the Middle East, like, everybody knows who you are. Like, if you're a Christian, if you're from America, they expect you to be a Christian. They're finding out now that we're not Christians really, but like that, it goes like that. So when I was over there, like, it was so easy to talk to people. Like, they love talking about stuff like that. And I wasn't really trying to evangelize anyone. I would just say, like, hey, do you want to talk about Jesus? And they're like, yeah, I want to talk about Jesus. And it was so easy, and most of them were refugees and that sort of thing. It was like, unfortunately, like, we had like an outreach. We were trying to invite just like your typical Lebanese citizen there, and they were harder to talk to. They were more like Americans where, they're just like, oh, I don't want to have anything to do with that church God stuff, And so the students that you're meeting on campus, are you finding out that it's the ones that are from the Middle East who talk more, or how do the American students respond?
Well, it's a very interesting point you bring up. And I would say in our experience, the utilization of more godly or religious language in these conversations is more divided based on age rather than are they from the Middle East or are they from America? In my experience, it's typically the older generations, 40 plus, who are more turning into the godly language. It's the younger generations, both in the Holy Land, across the Middle East, and in America, who are much more secular. They much more like to have conversations based on ethnic and cultural bases rather than religious. I want to just plug Roots for a second. One of my first experiences at Roots was an interfaith conversation, and it was led by Khalid Abu Awad, who was talking about the Islamic theology of Jesus, and Hanan Schleisinger, who was talking about the Talmudic perception of Jesus. And so these conversations are, in my opinion, much more prone to the older demographic. Khalid is in his 70s, Hanan's in his 70s, and so that's the mode they like to have conversations through religion, because they are both religious, they're older. People our age, we're more secular, we're more left-leaning, and so the conversations are much more about nationality, culture, ethnic-based conversations, much more secular verbiage rather than religious.
I will say, I'll comment on this actually. This is kind of a sidetrack, I guess, from Atidna, but I will tell you my favorite conversations that I have outside of Atidna specifically are with a lot of Arab Christians. I know a lot of Arab Christians and a lot of Coptic Christians as well. And they are some of the nicest and the smartest people that I know when it comes to having dialogue about religion and faith, to the point where I've went to a few of their Bible studies as well, as somebody who's not even Christian, because it's so intriguing to me the way that they talk. And these are people who are, let's say, from Egypt, and they are very passionate about Egyptian history and politics, but also about their faith. And for me, I think it's impossible to separate, let's say, an issue like Israel-Palestine completely from faith, because faith does play a role, of course. There are many people who are Muslim who think, or Jewish, who think that this is, that there is a religious component to this, which is absolutely correct. And so, while we don't typically talk about religion in Atidna dialogues, I personally think that religious dialogue is very important when it comes to talking about the history of the conflict, the history of the Middle East, and also talking about culture. It's a huge cultural component, obviously. And many Arab Christians will tell you they're very, very proud to be Christian. And I admire that very much.
Yeah, I guess my question was less about, speaking about religious things and more about the individuals who participate in the conversations and whether they're religious or not. Do you find, because Middle Easterners, they love to talk about things, and so, but Americans, it can be a little bit harder to draw them into the conversation.
I would say we hit both for sure. Of course, on college campuses, right, especially more progressive college campuses, religion is not the most promoted concept, especially amongst our age group. We're a very secular age group. But of course, right, if people are coming from the Middle East, coming from that background, many of them will still be more in touch with that identity. Their religious expressions are more outward than Americans, and they bring that into Atidna. They talk about religion, their faith, and how that shapes their worldview. Many of the conversations we've had on a historical basis revolve around the Ottoman Empire, about how Islamic law dictated the rights of Jews and Christians in the land. And so many of the conversations are framed through Islam, but not exclusively through Islam, right? There's history components, there's religious components, but people are bringing their experiences, their beliefs in Islam and Christianity and Judaism into the conversation. It's definitely not sidelined at all.
Yeah, I think that we have a lot of people who are first generation American. I'm first generation American as well. But typically people who, in my eyes, who are either born in the Middle East or are first generation here are the most passionate and are the most wanting to engage in the conversation. And typically we find that through more Arabs. Correct me if I'm wrong, Elijah, but typically, a lot of the Jews are not first generation American typically. A lot of them have parents who were born in the U.S., for example, or have generations here. And so, I don't know. I personally think this is such an obvious thing, but the more recently that you came to the U.S., typically it's still the more passionate you are about your background ethnically and whatnot. And I find that that's mostly from people, who are either born in the Middle East or who are first generation, and they're the most passionate typically. And I think they have a lot of the times the best things to say.
Yeah, I would agree with that, man. I would also say that there's also, in both communities, both the Jewish community and the Palestinian community, a sense of cognitive dissonance, right? Especially when you're removed from the locus of your people. And so first-generation Palestinians who are now in America are grappling with an identity crisis, right? They want to connect to their roots, to their land, to their heritage, but they're removed from that land. And through the only way that they can really express that is through conversations, through outward expressions of identity as an individual. And so that's why we find that passion. And it's not just reserved for Palestinians. Many first-generation Israelis are the same way. And Jadd's completely right. They are the most passionate, without a doubt.
Justin, welcome on stage. What's on your mind?
So when I went to school in the university, not so many years ago, okay?
Yeah.
So it was kind of during the transition where the struggle, I want to say on the US basis, it was turning. In the early years, if you go to a campus, it'd be run by GUPS, the General Union of Palestine Students, which was a very popular group that existed on many campuses. They still exist in some universities.
Yeah.
Later, we started to lose people to more Islamic affiliated organizations. Like this is not a Palestinian issue. This is an Islamic issue.
Sure.
So I recently attended a few events in the University of California, and I was shocked because number one, the everything that was done for Palestine was done by the Muslim Students Association. And they were, I want to say, like 90% not Palestinian. And then the worst part was the Students for Justice for Palestine. And like UC Davis, for example, the head of it is a Lebanese woman who was extremely, extremely a rejectionist. Like, I couldn't even relate to her. And I said, lady, I'm coming to you from Palestine, and I'm telling you, you're full of shit. And she was like, no, this is the way Palestinians, you know, secular, democratic, one state. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So it's like, it's like, and I hate to be critical of just the Palestinian side, because, you know, we can talk about the Israeli side. Of course. But it was like, I found myself stuck between rejectionists that like, it was a zero-sum game where one state from the river to the sea, which, okay, I can understand, but whatever. And then on the other side, this Muslim Students Association, whose ideology has, and, you know, we can talk about, you know, Islam, this ideology that's been basically hijacked by extreme Salafi brotherhood thinking. And I'm like, oh my God, we are so in trouble. Like, literally, I like wanted to like go home and like run. I was like, thank God I didn't go to college during this year, because I'd literally be into a fight every day. So it's the opposite. But Elijah was saying, like, you know, the younger generation is more secular. It's actually the opposite in the Palestinian side. I'm finding the younger generation is clinging on. They're being much more religious in I want to say, like, maybe not in my time, but like my older brother or sister's time. Yeah. You know, like my sister, you know, I have a sister who's a lot older than me. She was actually more in line with PFLP. Very secular, very this, where most of my family are pro-Fatah. I don't think we have any Islamists in my family. But anyways, the point is that this is the attitude of the youth that I saw today on that part.
And Justin, I would just ask, were you finding that the majority of people that were more Islamically inclined were Palestinian, or were the people in quote unquote Palestinian spaces who were speaking on behalf of Palestinians or in Palestinian, right? MSA it's very Pakistani, Bengali, more right? It's not necessarily Palestinian speaking, it's people that aren't Palestinian speaking over Palestinians.
They are not Palestinian, and not just that, but the mission that I felt was dangerous was that they were being told, like when I grew up, we were like, okay, Depka on Thursday night, Arabic on Saturday, blah, blah. Like, we did cultural things that are associated with Palestine, but these are being washed away in the Palestinian Arab community in replace of what? Muslim school, Islamic school, that is literally like marginalizing the Palestinians to just like chapter, maybe like, you know, like sort of like we're in February, what is this? It's Black History Month, right? Yeah, let's talk about Black History Month, and then the rest of the year we're going to talk about, you know, every other history. So, and I think this is discreditous, and this is why. And then if I, like me, when I tell them, no, we need to focus on Palestinian concentrate, oh, you're a nationalist. You're a kafir. You believe in tribalism. You know, I mean, this is what's being launched at us.
Yeah, no, that's bullshit. I will say, there's nothing wrong with putting Palestinianism at the head of your identity. You are a Palestinian, and your people are being oppressed, right? That should be the focus of your identity. I mean, I would say on college campuses, it is ironic because many Palestinian Christians who come to us say they don't want to enter Palestinian spaces because they're very Islamic, right? They're very Islamic centered. They're doing events at the mosque. They're not doing them in a neutral space. They're focusing on Islamic language and not like secular or class-based language, which is very exclusionary. And so it's definitely an issue. I mean, Jadd, would you concur with that? I mean, most Palestinian Christians gravitate to Atidna because they say that they're not comfortable in Palestinian exclusive spaces because they're solely Islamic based.
Not even just Palestinians, Arabs in general. I mean, you know, and Justin, this is completely true what you were saying. My biggest fear is that we have people, I think, in the West now who are, let's say, a part of groups like PSC. Let's just say PSC, the Palestine Solidarity Committee, who are not Palestinian, who have, I mean, many of their chants are purely Islamic chants, for example, and that's not relatable to a lot of people, but they also view it through an Islamic lens. You know, we're freeing Jerusalem, for example, we're freeing Al-Quds, we're freeing Al-Aqsa, for example. And I mean, great, but like, obviously, like many Palestinians are very diverse. They're not all just Muslims. Palestinians in general are not super religious compared to a lot of other groups in the Middle East. And I think that you're right. A lot of them are like, it has to be this way, reject any sort of quote unquote normalization, and do this, this, and that. And to me, it becomes very troubling when I see people who start saying stuff on behalf of our people who say, well, I know what Palestinians want best, for example, and they wanted this, this, and that. And that's obviously not true in many cases. And Elijah's right, for example. Palestinian Christians don't like these circles because they also, don't like the religious component to it. And these groups also tend to be very extreme, and they act like they know what's, best for all of us. And so, even for me, a lot of the Muslim circles will be very either for me, it's they do view it through either an Islamic lens or they view it through what they think is a Palestinian lens, but they actually are not representing all Palestinians in their way of thinking. And it's just it's very frustrating. And, it's kind of their way or the highway, so to speak. And like me personally, like I have a Palestinian flag right behind me. I don't like when I see like, this is just me, but like when people are, using like the Palestinian flag with the Shahada, for example, on it. I mean, great, but like, like I have many, like, for Christians, it's kind of like hard to relate, for example. And so I like to avoid that sort of thing. Like we have the pan-Arab colors on our flag. I mean, we can debate whether or not Palestinians think that being Arab is an integral part of their identity, but I just think there needs to be that separation. And I do have a fear in this sort of, I guess you could say, like, I don't even know how I would word this perhaps, but just this hijacking, I think, of the Palestinian movement since October the 7th. I think prior to October 7th, it was not this bad at all.
It was. I would say it was.
You think so?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll tell you why. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Elijah. No, I was going to say because I'll tell you why. Because I'm sure you've seen it, Jadd, that, I mean, how many times have you been called a sellout? How many times have you been called, a Zionist sympathizer and stuff like that? And even, and here's the thing, it's like people, even like me, and Adar knows my position very well on certain things. Like, I don't compromise certain things, like in regards to Palestinian rights and equality. Now, if I speak to Israelis and this makes me a sellout, well, guess what? That makes Yasser Arafat a sellout. That makes, every Palestinian, and people, and even when I say like Marwan al-Barghouti, who I hope will be released from prison soon. He says the same thing that I say. So is he a sellout? He's been sitting in a jail cell for 25 years.
Let's even take it one step further. I mean, Hamas has been showing willingness to negotiate with Israelis, so they're also sellouts,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Ahmed Yassin, he sat down with who? Elijah?
Oh my gosh, the head of Roots, a settler in the West Bank.
Menachem Froman. He sat with them and they had a beautiful conversation and they actually considered each other friends. So is he a sellout? That's what I'm saying. It's insane how these people take these positions. And but it's like, but here's the problem. The problem is that the people that are being I mentioned John Aziz earlier, but another one I'll mention, Adar just interviewed him, Ahmed Fouad Khatib.
Ahmed.
They're displayed, but the problem with these guys is that they've built careers and money and how should I say, a lifeline on taking certain positions that okay, Ahmed, I mean, I agree with him on a lot of stuff, but the thing is, some of his motivation and some of his positions are like he had an interview the other day with, I forgot who it was, literally blame the Palestinians for everything. If we weren't such bad people and violent people, then the Israelis might actually one day decide they like us. And then they can live with us.
He also said the only good thing that Yasser Arafat did was recognize the state of Israel. I mean, that's, that's hard to digest. So
and that's what I'm saying. And that's what makes it hard for people like you and me, Jadd, is that anything we do that's realistic and we do it because we know that it's in the interest of our people to move forward and it's not selling out. It's basically this. It's considered selling out. And this is why I am against these crowds. And unfortunately, it comes from these students, the rejectionists, and those who tend to and I'm a devout Muslim, by the way. I'm a very religious person. Don't think I'm a secularist. I mean, I do believe that religion shouldn't be part of government because usually when it is, it turns into an authoritarian, situation. But on the other hand, it's just you get it from these people, and that's it. So it just makes it tough for us.
No, a very interesting conversation Jadd had around 2-3 months ago, I think it was with one of the leaders of Austin's local Palestine activist
Austin
group.
for Palestine Coalition.
Austin for Palestine Coalition, and she wanted to have a conversation with Jadd about Atidna. And in the conversation, she said,
"Just me, not Elijah."
Yes, I mean, this is an important part of the conversation. She knows about me, right? I've been on Al Jazeera. I'm not considered, right, like a staunch Zionist by any shape or form, right? I'm someone that the Arab and Muslim community comes to for dialogue typically. But she did not want me in this conversation, only Jadd. And one of the things she told Jadd was, why would you be, how can you define yourself as non-Zionist or anti-Zionist when you believe that Jews should be in the land? Not even Zionists, just Jews should be in the land, right? Her vision of liberation was not talking with Israelis, but expelling them, right? And that is who's gripping the leadership, the most extreme of extreme, right? Even the PFLP, right, Justin? They did not believe in expelling anyone. Their whole belief was one state from the river to the sea where Jews and Arabs create a Palestinian identity together. It wasn't even an Arab identity. It was a joint Jewish and Arab identity under the Palestinian fold. So these groups that are gripping these activist spaces are sadly the ones who are the most extreme, and they're the ones who are probably going to be more active and want to lead these groups, but sadly they have the most vitriolic rhetoric by far, and it's not healthy. And I think maybe this one was an Islamist, I'm not sure, Jadd, but
it's not Palestinian just, or even Arab.
Yes, Pakistani and Iranian.
South Asian. Yes,
exactly. Yeah. So
she told me, she asked me if I was a Zionist, and I said, of course not. And she goes, but you think that Jews should be able to live in the land? And I said, yeah. And she goes, you can't be an anti-Zionist then. And conversation's over. I don't know what to say.
Those are devoid from the definition of Zionism, but yeah.
In my opinion, I like to say that everyone's opinion, everyone should be able to have an opinion, but outsiders with really no skin in the game who are taking these extreme stances, more extreme than the people living on the land, the people who are actually victimized and traumatized by this conflict, it's much easier for me to be sympathetic to people who develop extreme views because they are so involved in a conflict that it's hard for them to take a step back and see things differently. But if you are a step removed and you're still this extreme, as far as I'm concerned, take it, sit this one out. We'll figure this out. We don't need you. Yeah.
There's a difference between the 5-year-old in Gaza that's like face was plastered all over Twitter for wearing a Hamas band who had his parents killed versus a woman in Michigan who is going crazy over this issue, who has no skin in the game, right? You can't compare these two. They've been quote unquote radicalized for different reasons, and one of them is based on lived experience, and the other one is just based on causing polarization and vitriol for the sake of it. And it's honestly disgusting.
We have a question from David Casaza. David, thanks for your patience. Have you encountered pushback by school administrations or campus organizations? Do you foresee greater difficulty in open dialogue given the Trump executive order related to student visa cancellations for Palestine protests? Good question, David.
Yeah, a very good question. Yes. On the second point, yes, there are many students, especially from the Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim denominations, who are saying, I don't feel comfortable in these spaces. Atidna prides itself on being private. Whatever you say in the room does not leave the room. We want to make sure your identity, your personal safety is all kept under our fold, and that there's no risk of retribution by the administration or by government officials for what you say. We are a free and open space, and we don't want any pushback. But regardless, students still feel uncomfortable. They're worried someone will dox them, someone will leak something they say in the conversation. So there are students that are saying, no, I just can't, right? I'm on a student visa. I just don't want to be a part of this organization anymore. And honestly, it isn't a new fear. So for example, we had a co-leader at our UPenn chapter. He's from a Kuwaiti background who ended up not continuing with Atidna for that very fear. He was worried that something he would say would be leaked, and then from there he would have his student visa revoked. Trump, I think, has just amplified that fear tenfold. But Jadd, I mean, if you're noticing something different, I would be interested. But in terms of administration, yeah, we have experienced some pushback from certain administrations. For example, me and Jadd were supposed to go on a speaking tour to some universities. I'll name names because I really don't care. One of them was Brandeis. We've had a few other schools who initially invited us, But then they did a little more research. They found out I went on Al Jazeera, and they said, you know what? No, right? We're not going to platform this organization anymore because of the personal beliefs of one of their co-leaders. That's BS. If the whole reason of the organization is free and open dialogue, regardless of your opinion, why are you deplatforming us from coming to your school to speak about dialogue and mutual understanding because of the opinions of me? So, I mean, we have experienced pushback, and it is BS, but you live with it, man, and you just try and go forward.
Yeah, we just live with it, you know. I don't have honestly much to add to that except that, you know, certain people give us some pushback, but for the most part, I would say we've had it relatively easy compared to other people. But yeah, I mean, there's always a fear amongst participants, especially about potential backlash they may get, but also just, you know, now with Trump in office, that's, I think, just kind of an extra wild card.
So we are closing in on the hour, so we're going to wrap this up. We have a fair bit of university students here in this community, and I know a lot of, we'll put this on YouTube as well. So if someone wants to get involved, whether to join these conversations in a university with an existing chapter or help start a new chapter at their universities, what is the best way to reach out? What's the best way to go about that?
So the best way would be to follow us on social media, especially Instagram. Our Instagram is Atidna_international. Send us a DM, and we will be happy to work with you to get a chapter started. Or you can go to our website, atidnainternational.com, and we have a form you can fill out that will be sent to me and Jadd, and we'll correspond with you that way. Either way works for us.
Yeah, and Atidna is spelled Atidna.
We'll put that also in the description of this video so anyone can see it.
Sure.
And Elijah,
Also,
Jadd,
make sure.
Yep.
Make sure it goes to the right Atidna, because there's another organization called Atidna, which is very different.
Yes. Thank you, Justin. Yes. So there's another group in Israel out of Haifa. That whole premise is assimilating Palestinian citizens of Israel under the Israeli identity. They are not related to us. They're called Atidna, but they don't deserve the name. We're the true Atidna. Only focus on us, guys. Do not go to their
Atidna
website.
International. That's who we are.
I think they're atidna.org or something.
You know,
don't go to that.
When I changed the name to my YouTube, it started the Great Debate, and then we changed it to Sulha. And then after doing that, I discovered there was another NGO under the same name. But then shortly after, they shut down. And, you know, I'm never happy when an NGO focusing on peace shuts down, but I guess there's only one now. You know.
Yep. Amen.
Yeah, I mean, hey.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
So, Jadd and Elijah, thank you so much. Shikana and Justin, thank you for hopping on here and asking questions. And viewers, David, also thank you for your awesome question. If people want to stay on to chat, let's just hop over into the lobby. We're gonna shut this room down, but we can, you know, we're still in open hours, so feel free to hop in the lobby and keep the conversation going. Thank you all.
Yeah, let's do it.